you have somebody that is being outspoken, if you have somebody that is, messing with the order of the court, if you have somebody that's trying to fight people in the courtroom, yeah, it's time for the judge to kind of lay it on heavy and start getting order back in the courtroom. But in this particular situation, I just don't think it was called for.
What it made me think of is you never know when you're on camera and what's going to be recorded, so always act in accordance that you're always on camera.
That's a good rule of life nowadays. Everybody has a camera, whether it's in their pocket, on their phone, whether it's connected to their home, whether it's on a street post. It's just everywhere you look, there's cameras. And with those cameras also come audio.
Medicine,
Law, friendship. This is Dr. Long and Lawyer Nik. You're listening to the Medico-Legal Brief.
one doctor, one lawyer, and a whole lot of gray area.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Medico-Legal Brief, where medicine meets the law. I'm Lawyer Nik, and I'm here with Dr. Long. And today, we are going to review another viral post. It looks like one of the judges here in Texas went viral. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the video, but we're going to go ahead and show it here in a little bit, and then we're going to review it and give our opinions on it. So, Dr. Long, how's it going?
It's going well. Actually, before you even brought up the video to me, I had already seen it on my own feed. It was really interesting to see the public's view and reactions to what was seen. What it made me think of is you never know when you're on camera and what's going to be recorded, so always act in accordance that you're always on camera.
Yeah, that's a good rule of life nowadays. Everybody has a camera, whether it's in their pocket, on their phone, whether it's connected to their home, whether it's on a street post. And with those cameras also come audio. Now, the funny thing is, with some of these individuals that are getting backlash for the things that they do, we saw it in the recent post where we went into what the med student did, where he had the trouble with the Mayo Medical School. But some of these people are doing it to themselves, because they're streaming their life or they're making these posts and they're voluntarily putting it on the internet. And from there, they're experiencing public backlash. This clip with the judge is definitely one of those situations.
Is this a judge that you've ever worked with or seen, or is this the first time you've heard about this specific judge?
No, this is the first time I've heard about this specific judge. This lends itself to the overall theme of our podcast today, which is positions of power and how we expect our leaders to lead and how we expect those that we give power and responsibility to act in a professional, respectful way. Obviously, there are instances in which the people in those positions of power need to have a backbone and need to stand up for the right things and be on the right side of things. But there is instance where power is abused, and we'll see that in this clip. To lay the foundation, this is Judge Milliron. He is in the 205th Civil District Court in Harris County, which is essentially Houston. Now, I have been down near Harris County in court, but I haven't been in Harris County. I was actually in a county directly to the north, and we had a few trials there. I do not know of this judge. I've never heard of him prior to this. We're in Texas, which is predominantly a red state, but he has a political affiliation that's Republican. He took the bench in January of 2025. And then some other background. He was licensed in 2004. He spent his career in civil litigation, so doing business disputes, personal injury, so on and so forth. He was a former law firm partner before he became a judge. And then finally, he got his education at Houston Law. So he's even local to the city that he's currently a judge in.
Pardon my ignorance, but because we're talking about roles of power or leadership, I'm curious, how does one transcend into the role of a judge? Is there certifications, education? How are you achieving that role? And do you have to start out as a lawyer first before you get into the role of a judge?
So in most cases, you do have to be a lawyer. There are some unique cases, but for the most part, all judges are lawyers previously. And then outside of being appointed, most of the time you are an elected official. So every year that there's a vote, they are somewhere on the ballot. There are political affiliations that take place with those judges. You'll see Republican, you'll see Democratic, you'll see somebody that might be independent or part of a different party. They'll actually campaign just like any other mayor or governor or state senator or state representative. You'll actually see, if you drive around, at least here in Texas, and I'm willing to bet that this is across the country, you see the little yard signs that say, vote for so-and-so. Well, for judges, you'll see vote for Judge Nick for the 1000th Civil District Court. So there is campaigning, there is money, there is expenses that come along with campaigning, and there is backing. What you'll also see is some of these judges will run uncontested. They are just the selection. Nobody's going to run against them. Sometimes that goes to the fact that some people think they can't win that bench seat. Others just really, really, really like the judges, and so they don't want to shake things up. And we've talked about it before, where in your own career, in your own professional bubble, people protect their own. In the lawyer sphere, when you're looking at judges, more lawyers are probably going to show up to vote for that judge than your regular citizens, just by the very nature of they're in front of these people. They're in front of these people every day. So they want to make sure that they are in front of the judge that they want to be in front of.
Got it. And I know you had mentioned that he has an affiliation with the Republican political party, but it's quite interesting that as a judge, you're supposed to be very neutral. You're not supposed to be too biased. And you're right. In the state of Wisconsin, where I live, we actually just had an election last week where we voted for one of the judges in the state to the Supreme Court. And same thing, affiliation. They did not outright say that they were Democratic or Republican, but you could tell based on the money, the funding, and the political backing, you could tell who was on which side, which is an interesting way to view a judge who is supposed to be unbiased and neutral.
Very, very much so. And that goes to trying to figure out who you want on the bench and how you want them to lean with ruling. For most Americans, what we primarily see is the Supreme Court and appointments to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court is now leaning one way or the other. That's the same way of looking at judges in your local community. When you vote for these individuals, they're going to lean one way or the other when it comes to either conservative or more liberal views. Specifically with civil law, you might have a judge that leans more towards protecting big business, or maybe protecting small business, or maybe protecting the customer. There are different approaches, and that runs with the political affiliation and what their platform ultimately is. And granted, as we see in most political campaigns, the money talks, the support talks. If you want to be elected and you want to get that funding, sometimes you have to play ball with that political party. Now, after you get elected and you take the bench, yeah, it's on you to continue that career as a judge or as mayor or governor or whatever. But your constituents, the people that are going to be voting for you, are always watching. When it comes up for re-election, you're either going to be re-elected or somebody else is going to beat you out for it. And that's the other thing. You can be beat out by another Republican. You can be beat out by a Democrat. You could be beat out at certain layers just because people, will end up voting, and you got to do right by the people that you're serving.
And I'm glad you brought up the civil court and the civil judge that in the area that he will be judging cases in. Can you give us a little bit more information what that means, like a civil court and civil cases? How is that different from criminal cases versus another?
Yeah, so in certain jurisdictions, you'll have the district court. Overall, the district court's like the big boy court. District courts can be very specialized. You might have district courts that just oversee civil. You might have district courts that oversee family law and district courts that oversee criminals. Here in Tarrant County, we have, I think, 8 courts that strictly oversee family law. And then you have a bunch of courts that strictly oversee criminal, and you have a bunch of courts that strictly oversee civil. So when you're voting, you're keeping in mind the history that judge or potential judge has in that court system. What you'll see, at least from a family law perspective, is a lot of family law attorneys, after practicing for however many years, they'll either get the feedback from their peers that it's time to try to be judge. They'll get feedback from their peers that they want them to be judge, or they may just want to make a change. Maybe they've had a discourse with somebody on the bench and they say, I could do a better job. I'm going to make a run at it and see what happens. In specific instances where your court system is broken out by specialties almost, you'll see the people run for judge that have worked in that specialty. Now, in other areas, there are district courts that just do it all. They might see civil on one day. They might see criminal the next day. They might see family later on that day. It just depends on the court's jurisdiction. I want to say that for the 215th, he's seeing everything. And the reason I say that is because there was a criminal defense attorney, we'll get to this, a criminal defense attorney that wrote him an email and that he called him to his court. So I would think that the 215th handles both civil and criminal.
Good information. So, as we continue to talk, it seems like there's a lot of power that obviously a judge holds, but even more so the amount of power that he holds within that area, that district that he serves. I'm really curious to see your reaction in real time because I know we've both watched this individually, but just curious what your thoughts will be once we hash it out and see what it looks like.
And you're disjoined from the audio here, right?
Yeah, it should be.
Sorry.
Mariah, did I make this up?
5 seconds. 1 second. You don't have to go far. You're disjoined. Okay. Yeah, you're good. Okay. False alarm.
No, it wasn't a false alarm.
False negative. Sorry.
Don't joke around. I'm serious about this. It was happening. Again,
I understand. I'm just saying I can't see it, sir.
we're good. Thank you. Get out of my courtroom. Fine, case supervisor. Jesus Christ. Sick and tired of this bullshit today.
Long, I'll yield the floor to you.
You got to put yourself in this guy's shoes who's coming in to help the judge. I don't know about you, but I would be very nervous just walking into a courtroom, let alone being that close to a judge, because like you said, they are in a position of power. They make a lot of life-changing decisions. And so just like if I get pulled over, I speak to a cop, I'm in presence of a judge, I would feel the same way. Just afraid of judgment, afraid of saying the wrong things. And you could tell that this guy was nervous. He had that really nervous chuckle at the very end when he was trying to clearly make a joke. But then I can also see the side of the judge. He clearly had a lot on his docket and he was dealing with a lot that day. This was that last thing that just pushed him over the edge, and he probably could have held his tongue, but he said more than he should have. I see both sides, but it definitely does not look good for the judge.
Yeah, it really doesn't. And we've talked about this before. Our staff, our support staff, is extremely important. In the law, we have office managers, we have paralegals. When you look at the court system, you have the bailiffs, you have the court coordinator, obviously the judge. There's so many people that go into making a process work. In the hospital, you have your RNs, you have your MPs, you have your physician assistants, you have your intake individuals, you have your overall medical system managers. Again, so many people that go in to make things work. Being a judge is an absolute position of power. Now, granted, you can be held liable for things that you do. There are repercussions for your actions, but we are trusting our judges to be civil servants making the best decisions for our communities. And when you see somebody that treats another individual this way, that is clearly a support function. That IT guy, in my opinion, is probably extremely important to making sure that that court system goes off without a hitch, especially in a post-COVID world where things are on Zoom, obviously. You need that guy. So now you're going to give him a bad experience because you're having a bad day. The expectation is that judges, for the most part, they're humans. Don't get me wrong, they are humans, but they're in that position because you expect them to be able to control their emotions. And in this case, this judge didn't necessarily control his emotions.
Yeah, I agree. It was an emotional reaction, but also an egotistical reaction. From his perspective, he was being told that there wasn't anything wrong. And he was like, well, maybe it was a false alarm. He was just crying wolf. I don't think the IT guy was intentionally trying to make the judge feel that way. It's just his way of diffusing the situation and just letting the judge know that he could find anything. He should have been able to move on. This is a very common scenario that we also see in the medical field. The one thing we get taught when you go for medical school interviews as well as residency interviews is that you want to make sure you treat everyone you meet on that interview as if they're the most important person in the world, because you have no idea who they are. They could be the janitor, they could be the secretary, they could be the actual director or the CEO of the system. You never know. And so you want to make sure that you treat everyone with respect, and not just because you have to get the job, but you want to do it because you respect other humans. And like you said, everyone plays a very specific role to keep everything running. In a hospital system, we are nothing if we don't have our people who clean our rooms and make sure that everything is stocked and in the places that they're supposed to be. Like, we would not be anything without them. Even though we are talking about nurses and doctors and PAs and NPs, we also forget the ancillary staff. Those are the blue collar workers that truly are the foundations of all of our systems, not just the medical field, but also the legal field.
What some people don't understand is those people can make your life a living hell, an absolute living hell. One of my favorite movies is Fight Club. And in Fight Club, there's a quote where they're saying, like, we're the people that drive your cabs, we're the people that cook your food, we're the people that take out your trash. Don't mess with us, essentially. And there is something to that. Now, this IT worker has had a bad experience with the judge. Well, if he continues to work in that environment, he can make the judge in that courtroom or any courtroom, he can make their lives living hell. Because when he gets called up for an IT issue, it might be, all right, I'm on lunch. I'm going to take my sweet, sweet time. Everything could seem completely above board, but he can do those little things where he's just not putting in as much of an effort. If you need the Zoom call to work 5 minutes ago and he takes 15 minutes getting to your courtroom because he was quote unquote busy, well, what are you going to do about it? But if you treat your people with respect, they'll do whatever they can for you. They'll go above and beyond. In this situation, he had the opportunity to give the IT support person a very good experience, and he just didn't. And that's ultimately a shame.
Yeah. And as the person leading the courtroom or leading the team in any scenario, you really want to cultivate that sort of teamwork and camaraderie and selflessness to help each other out in times of needs, because we don't all know everything about everything. There's always going to be another expert in the room about a specific subject. And in this scenario, a judge is not great at IT. You got the IT who is the expert coming in. You definitely want to make sure that you treat them right so that they can continue to help you in the future, but also help your job, your career, because like you said, they can make it a living hell. I'm sure they could throw a little virus or a little bug into his system and just really throw off his day if he wanted to. I would imagine that he wouldn't do that, of course, being afraid of the ramifications, but there's just so many things that can happen. And some people can be petty.
And I want to circle back to something that you said, where judges are very intimidating individuals. They have a lot of power, whether you are a lawyer or you are not a lawyer. When you enter a courtroom, it's almost akin to entering a place of worship, maybe entering a church or entering a mosque. It's very serious. You don't know what everything is in the courtroom. You just see this person sitting on this bench. Usually the bench is elevated. You see chairs and you see a bailiff who's got a gun and handcuffs. It's a very serious situation. And when I first started practicing, when I was making my rounds, meeting all these judges, it was scary at first. I was very intimidated. But a lot of judges, they're people. You walk in and obviously there has to be this facade of, I control my courtroom. I'm not going to let things get out of order, so I need to control what's in front of me. But I've been asked back to chambers numerous times, hey, so where'd you graduate from? What are you practicing? Is this what you want to do the rest of your life? Well, if you need anything, I'm part of this bar association. I do this. Please let me know. And so from a lawyer position, like there is that back and forth. But I've seen judges be very, very kind to people in their courtroom. I've also seen judges blast people in their courtroom, and usually it's warranted. So if you have somebody that is being outspoken, if you have somebody that is, messing with the order of the court, if you have somebody that's trying to fight people in the courtroom, yeah, it's time for the judge to kind of lay it on heavy and start getting order back in the courtroom. But in this particular situation, I just don't think it was called for. I have two examples, and actually these are both in front of the same judge, where the judge made me look stupid. And I deserved it. And as a lawyer, you sign up for that. You know that if you're doing litigation, you're going to be going before a judge and another lawyer, and you better be on because these people have your ass. If you're trying to bullshit somebody, if you're trying to snake something through, you're going to get called out fast. So you have to have the professional decorum when you're entering the courtroom. But one of my first times, I forgot a pen, and I asked to borrow the judge's pen. And as a baby lawyer, you don't do that. And she reamed me a new one for not being prepared in the courtroom. And it was right in front of my client. Afterwards, she took me back to chambers and said, hey, I had to do that. That was a lesson. That same judge, who was a woman, a few weeks later, I don't know what I was doing, but I was just so panicked at what was going on. I said, yes, sir, instead of yes, ma'am. And she looked at me like I was crazy. And here I am, a lawyer, and I mess up. And again, I got a little bit of a reaming. I apologize. It was a bad day. But again, accountability, I was quick to apologize. I was quick to acknowledge where I went wrong. A lot of judges don't ever have to acknowledge where they went wrong. They make their decision, they stand by it, and the only time that a judge's decision is really ridiculed or feedback is provided is either by the people, by the news, or when it goes to an appellate court and that decision is overturned by appellate judges, which are the hierarchical ladder above them. You can argue with the judge's feedback all you want or a judge's decision all you want. Their decision is their decision. There's another clip rolling around in which this judge did the exact same thing to some lawyers where he just didn't want to hear it. And he threatened to hold them in contempt and threatened to handcuff them and throw them in the slammer for a few days and give them fines. The problem here is that with this judge, it's a recurring theme that if he's challenged or if his ego is kind of tested, he might lash out. Granted, I've only seen the 2 videos, so that may not be the case at all. But with this sort of following from a societal standpoint, there's a problem here that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, it sounds like he's showing pattern, just like our other episode where we spoke about the 4th year medical student, where he had a pattern of posting a specific video or message. I'm curious, as a lawyer, if you've seen these videos and then now you have to actually go into court with this judge, does that change your outlook on the judge, the court, and the cases that you have to report to him for? Like, is that going to change anything from a professional standpoint? Obviously, you're never going to go into his court because you don't live in Houston, but like in some hypothetical world, would that change how you view the judge from a judge to lawyer professional relationship?
Definitely, because now it's about strategy. If you know that a judge is a little bit more, let's say, aggressive in his rulings or doesn't take a lot of crap in his courtroom, you're gonna be prepared for that, and you're also going to prepare your client for that. It's, hey, no outbursts, don't argue with the judge. But there are other situations where you know the judge and you know that their demeanor is a little bit more lax. Like, I can show up and I can crack a joke and I can ask the judge how their day is and build the rapport. There are some judges that do that. And so then again, you go in with that as a strategy saying, okay, I know I can kind of get away with something, and not in the sense of something unethical, but I can get away with pushing an argument a little bit further. I can get away with making a statement or making an objection or having my client say something or not say something. There's different strategy to playing in front of the judge. That would definitely change things. Now, when you file a lawsuit, you don't get to pick your judge. It basically gets assigned to one of the district judges in the county that you're filing. If your client is getting sued or a client is coming to you saying, I've been sued, usually you already know what court it's in, it's court it's been assigned to. And so, yeah, technically, if you said, oh, no, I don't want to be in front of that judge, I'm not going to take that case, that could be a thing. But for the most part, if somebody's coming to you and they got a good case and they're going to pay, the bills, you're probably going to take it. But it definitely changes the demeanor and the strategy in which you bring to that courtroom.
That's so interesting because I didn't even think of it that way, that it would tie into the strategy, the way you counsel your clients and how you interact with the judge. So then that makes me think, is there some sort of like review, like a Yelp for judges out there or lawyers? And it's like, this judge is this type and they're talkative and there's all these goods and bad things, so that lawyers who go into that courtroom have a heads up about the judge?
Heads up about the judge exists. It is primarily through word of mouth because the legal community is very small. Just like the medical system in an area can be really small. You know all the doctors, you know all the specialists. Just like in the legal community, you know all the other lawyers. You're co-counsel with them. You're opposing counsel against them. You went to law school with them. You're running mates with them. There is word of mouth of, yeah, I just got my ass handed to me by Judge so-and-so. This is what they said. Be careful. Or good luck with the judge. Or, oh, the judge is having a really good day today. People share that intel, which helps. Now, again, going back to them being elected officials, you do have the review from the people. So I remember, and I'm not sure if it's still a thing, but when I was practicing in family law, there was an organization called Court Watchers, and they would go in because most of the time court is open to the public. There is some times in which the rules of the court are saying, hey, you can't be in here for whatever reason, or you can't come in, you can't record, you can't bring your cell phone. Like, there are certain rules that certain courts will follow, but these court watchers would go in and they would watch a family law trial or a judge for an entire day and see how they were ruling and see if it was consistent with the values of either their political affiliation or the community or their church, and they would post that online. If a judge gave a very lenient ruling on something, they might critique that and criticize it. If they made an aggressive ruling, they might do the same. And at that point, context is important. You're having somebody who may not understand the entire legal process, may not be a lawyer, come in and start saying the things that this judge is or isn't doing, and that can end up having political backlash. Or you could have somebody that is a lawyer that is no longer practicing that goes in and does the same thing and says, actually, per what they were doing, they were out of line here and they were out of line there. But yeah, it's a very interesting situation, especially when it comes to this position of power. The thing that always surprised me was that when a judge is elected, they actually go through an educational process on how to be a judge. There is a Texas Judicial Committee, and you basically go to like a boot camp on this is how you're supposed to act. This is how you're supposed to not necessarily rule, telling them how to rule, but like how to make rulings, how to do the administrative stuff, how to basically be a judge. That same sort of commission will be the ones that look at judicial repercussions, look at judicial feedback, investigations, so on and so forth.
So that is done after they've been elected. It's not done prior.
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. And obviously everybody knows from the presidential campaigning, we vote in November, that president doesn't take office until January. So there is a time of overlap in which the judge is able to be prepared before they take over the bench. But yeah, there's formal training that they go through. They have a committee that oversees their actions and can, pass down fines or recommendations, even in some instances suspend the judges from the bench. Obviously, if there's any criminal liability, the judge isn't above the law. They can be brought before the court and they can end up in jail. As we've seen with that show, Your Honor, that we both talked about, it's a very interesting world and it's a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah. Is there ever a scenario where a judge ever steps down and goes back to their prior role as a lawyer? Or once they're a judge, they just stay a judge and just go to different courts and districts?
They definitely can. You could take the bench for a few years and say, this isn't for me, and then choose to step down. Or maybe you get beat in a campaign and somebody else takes the bench and you've lost your official position as a judge. Now, a lot of times they'll go back to the law firm that they were a partner at. They'll open up their own firm because being a judge is the ultimate resume builder. You can now do pretty much whatever you want as long as you left everything on good terms. I saw retired judges ended up being mediators because they knew the law. They knew how judges would view it. They would come in, hold a mediation, have both sides and both attorneys work through the problem together and be able to give real practical advice on, hey, if you go to court, this is likely how this person's going to rule. I know it because I would rule this way and I worked with that person for several years. So you have that dynamic. And then, of course, you have the ability to go back and do other politics, go back and be a lawyer. One thing that is very, very big is obviously conflicts of interest. Let's say a judge was part of a big firm or maybe a partner in a big firm. There are usually restrictions on that firm then having cases in front of that judge to avoid any conflict. You just have to be aware of those types of conflicts of interest that would exist either when they're on the bench or when they leave the bench.
Got it. You had mentioned there was a second video. That's really interesting. I'm curious what ended up happening after the fact, because I saw the initial video, but I haven't seen the follow-up videos of any other interactions with other people after that viral clip for the judge.
He ended up getting, obviously, backlash from the community, but one specific attorney, I believe his name is James Stafford, he's a Houston lawyer, ended up writing Judge Milliron email. And it was critical on his behavior. It was basically criticizing the way that he was acting and asking him to apologize and basically requesting that he hold himself up to a better standard. And this is the unique thing. You can have judges that take the bench that have only been in practice for a few years. Because again, it's a political campaign. If you have the funding, if you have the backing, if you have the support from the community, you can win the bench. There's nothing that's stopping me from going and running for judge other than the fact that my experience isn't there and my funding isn't there and my campaigning isn't there. But if I was able to get all that in order, I could definitely make a run for it. What you'll see is that even though you might be a younger judge, you might have very, very seasoned attorneys that have been around the block a lot longer than you, that have more years of practice than you've been alive. These people are your peers, they're your colleagues. And just because you're the judge and you are ruling for these attorneys, they're still your peers in the community. And then you take it a step further. They are still your voters. So James Stafford wrote this email and the judge ordered him to come to court because he accused him of basically ex parte communication. Now, what ex parte communication is, if I have a case in front of a judge, both lawyers should be in attendance at every single hearing and every single communication. Ex parte communication is me trying to have a conversation with the judge outside of earshot of the other attorney. You just can't do that. There are very, very, very specific limited times in which you might end up having a conversation with a judge based on your case, and those are usually dire circumstances. But the judge tried to order him to court to talk about this ex parte communication, and the first thing that this attorney did was like, I don't have any cases in your court. There's no reason that this should be any sort of ex parte communication. You have no authority over me because I am just a voter exercising my free speech, criticizing the way that you are handling the bench. After that happened, he ordered him to show up at like 8 a.m. on a Monday to then face the wrath of the judge, to then face the ex parte accusation. And that attorney didn't show up. The people that did show up were a group of attorneys that are a part of the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association. So at 8 a.m., this group of attorneys supporting James Stafford showed up at the courthouse and the court doors were locked. Judge didn't open up his courtroom until 8:30. And apparently when he opened up the courtroom, all the lawyers went, sat inside, and the judge just went through business. Apparently he was very nice and respectful. He didn't give any formal apologies. He didn't acknowledge the Lawyers Association that was sitting in the room. But for the most part, it seemed like there was nothing further that was going to happen for James Stafford as far as the ex parte communication. Now, to this point, I still don't think there's been any sort of formal apology. I've seen some things online where he might have been fined or he might have had some sort of reprimand from the Judicial Oversight Committee that oversees judges in Texas. I can't confirm nor deny that 100%. But for the most part, damage is done. And the thing about this is this judge records all these videos in his courtroom. He was streaming all this. People can go back and look through apparently hours and hours and hours of streaming and basically now nitpick every instance of where this judge was out of line or maybe a little dramatic or maybe a little aggressive. And I'm curious to see what comes of that.
So what is your take on apologies, especially in a role of power like this or a leader in the group? What is your take in accepting or acknowledging mistakes versus just moving on and not thinking about it, talking about it? What is your take on that?
For the most part, judges shouldn't have to apologize in what their job requirements are. You are to make a decision and you are to stand by your decision. And if you start questioning your decisions, then everybody else is also going to question your decisions. Now, in this particular situation in which he had a run-in with an IT worker, an apology would be warranted. As simple, hey, I'm so sorry. I was out of line. I was having a day. The case that I was handling was rough. Kind of like what you said at the beginning of the podcast. My docket was full. Zoom was messing up. I was very frustrated. It could be as simple as I got into it with my wife or my husband or my partner, or I was in traffic and I spilled coffee. People have bad days, but acknowledging that you were wrong and a simple apology probably could have squashed this really, really fast. And here we are a few weeks later still talking about it. He could have just said, guys, I'm sorry, IT guy, I was out of line, and this would have all been over and done with. But it's almost the responses to those things that get you in deeper water. And because his response wasn't what the people wanted, every single day is being critiqued. And when it comes up for him to be reelected, if he chooses to run again, the voters will definitely turn out to make a decision as to whether or not he should stay on the bench.
I absolutely think that leading with humility is really important, especially in a role where I'm a physician and, a physician within the community. I'm seeing a lot of patients, but I also am a faculty member and I teach residents, new doctors. I don't know everything. And there are times where I accidentally say the wrong thing. Maybe we talk about a diagnosis and I might have mentioned something incorrectly. Because we are lifelong learners, even though we are technically at the top of the totem pole at the moment, does not mean that we can't make mistakes. So I am always, always, always an advocate of apologizing, owning up to your mistakes, and then finding and seeking the actual correct answer and the truth out of that. That goes a really long way for everyone on the team, but also everyone that follows suit from us. It sets a really good example. Do you feel like your position of leadership has changed in terms of the way you are a leader over the years? Obviously, I knew you way back when, before any leadership roles, but you were kind of a leader within our group. You helped make decisions in terms of which party we were going to go to or what sort of events we were going to do this weekend or what trips we were going to do. How do you feel like that has evolved over the years for you?
It has definitely evolved. And there are times in which I look back at my leadership skills and I realize I was completely out of line. with how I led. And there are other times where I'm very proud with how I led. Being a lawyer, first and foremost, you're put as a leader in the community. You know, you're leading your clients through a very difficult process. There's a lot of pressure on you to know what you're talking about and represent them to the best of your ability. And then when I transitioned to aerospace, I started off just as a regular employee. And then I became a team lead, and then I became a manager. And I was a team lead and a manager for a majority of my time at the company. And I had to learn a lot of different skill sets that I thought I already had, but really I was lying to myself. I would say things or I would do things where I thought this is what a good leader would do. I would see the feedback from my team and hear feedback from my peers or even the leaders above me. And I would have to check and adjust and say, okay, now I understand why that's not how we lead. And so it's evolved and it continues to evolve. Even you had mentioned being faculty. As an adjunct professor, I deal with students every single semester. And so it is my job to lead them in the pursuit of what they're trying to achieve. And I have to do the same thing. I'm dealing with very, very smart individuals. Not all of them are 22, 23, fresh out of college. You have some people with some life experience. You have some people even at 22, 23 that have a lot bigger accolades than I had at that age. You have to ride the line of hearing people out and making good decisions, but also being able to admit fault and check in. This happens at least once a semester. I will get into it with the student from an argumentative standpoint, from a me trying to provide feedback standpoint. And afterwards, I'll always look and say, okay, did I handle that the right way? And after the dust is cleared, I'll always go back to the student and say, hey, are we good? Do you have any feedback from me? Was there something there that didn't vibe, or is there something that I could have done better for the situation? That goes a long way when you are actively looking for feedback when you're in the position of power, because it builds trust, it builds rapport, and then it allows the other individual to know, hey, I can go to this person and they're not going to take it, to heart. They're not going to be too emotional about it. They're going to hear me out. And whether they make the change or not, that's on them. But at least I'm giving them the opportunity to hear me out. Mm-hmm. So, but I want to dive in more into the medical side with you, because you deal with a lot of different personalities. And I will be the first to say that as a patient, there are a lot of, there's some careers where a God complex does exist. When we look at doctors, there's a God complex there for some doctors. How do you feel about the leadership as far as the medical world and how some of these individuals act?
It's very similar to what you've already said. There are good actors and bad actors. Some people who are really good with building rapport with patients. And then there are some that just are not that great. And it seems, or the public may see, that some personalities tend to get thrown into or shift into specific specialties. Again, I love my surgeons, but you tend to have that idea or that picture of a surgeon being a little bit more cold, less approachable. However, I know so many surgeons that I would gladly go and have a beer with and have a conversation with. So like I said, there is an idea or an image that we may have of specific specialties, but that's not always true. With that said, my own personal growth in leadership has grown over the years as well. I was chief resident in residency and I ruled with an iron fist. I was the program director's second hand. I was there to help just make sure everything was up to par for the residency. And so everything had to be by deadlines. I was like nagging people. I was essentially a second parent to these other doctors, my colleagues. And there was a lot of pushback. Sometimes it was needed and they thanked me for it, but there were some times when it was too much and they just needed me to basically chill. And so I've taken that to heart and actually have loosened the reins. And now my new role as a faculty here at the new residency I work with, there are other people in the program that are already strict enough and they are known as the person that will put it down if they need to. So I'm coming in as the fun, more loose and exciting and relaxed attending. I'm really enjoying that because then it actually ties into my home life. With my 2-year-old, my 4-year-old, it's fun to be able to transition between those two modes where I'm fun dad, but I'm also strict dad. Like, yes, you can get away with some things, but most things you're gonna have to listen to what I say. Like, you're gonna have to eat your vegetables, but maybe you don't have to do this at this specific time. All of these lessons that I've learned throughout my career, my education has cultivated a personality that I hope my kids will love me more, and that I'm not type A, very strict parent like my parents were. I absolutely do not want that.
It's funny that you say that because when I was a team lead, I started running around like I was the shit and almost ruling with an iron fist up to like my power level because I wasn't a manager yet. There were times where I had managerial power and decision making, but it was similar. Like, we need to get this done. Let's do it now. And then when I became a manager, I almost went the exact opposite way. Okay, let's be more understanding. Let's try to almost be a voice of the people. And that also wasn't that good of a balance because then sometimes people take advantage of it. So you're trying to find that middle ground of how can I lead efficiently, lead from the front line, but also get things done to where people aren't taking advantage and looking at my kindness as a leader and thinking it's a weakness. That's probably a very good podcast for the future, talking about the different leaders we've experienced in life and the good things and the bad things that make them a good or bad leader. I am curious though, from your position as a voter, pulling this back full circle, you are a voter, you vote often. You are very in tune with politics at the local level and at the national level. In seeing this, and granted it's in Texas, but in seeing this and placing it in Wisconsin or placing it at a national level, how would you look at your vote for an individual like this in the future?
Like you've said already, I would look to see how he reacts to everything, the publicity, and then whether or not he's going to take ownership for his action. And then also to see if this is going to be repetitive or something that recurs, a pattern that we see. Those are going to be the things that I look for when it comes time to vote again.
I would have to agree. I'm excited to see what comes of this, if it just goes out there into the ether and quietly disappears, or if people start finding other things. Because in this day and age, we both can agree, if somebody finds one thing, then people are going to start digging and continue to dig. And some people just won't stop until they find everything. So I'm curious to see how this actually goes. So Dr. Long, this has been a great discussion. I'm super excited to get your feedback on it. Obviously, we talk a lot about the medical. So when something like this comes up and we can discuss it and have a good conversation about the legal, I love it. But I hope that people today, our audience listening, got a lot out of it. Hopefully we continue to follow this situation with the judge, and maybe we'll have more comments on it in the future. But with that, this has been the Medical Legal Brief, where medicine meets the law. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, follow. We're on all the social media. We're on YouTube. We're on Spotify. A new episode's airing every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Central Time. So look us up. Thanks, y'all.
Yes, we're doctors. Yes, we're lawyers. No, this podcast is not medical or legal advice. Do not take anything we say as a reason to perform your own heart surgery, represent yourself in court, or diagnose your neighbor's rash. This is for entertainment only. Think of it like hanging out with your smartest, wittiest friends, not a substitute for an actual appointment. If you act on anything we say without talking to your own professional, that's on you. Seriously, don't do that.